All right, now it says it's recording, so I think we're good to go with Courtney and Den talking, season one, episode one. We have to have a season. I have a feeling that this is gonna probably be a long-term project. So
Go
yeah,
seasonally.
yeah,
Break it
go
up into
like any show, right? Like you watch a show on Netflix, there are seasons, season one, season two. Like for us, I don't know, 12 episodes a season, 24 episodes a season, once a week, once a month, whatever it will be.
a season of figuring out what in the hell we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what the season is about. I mean, that's your idea of, Courtney and Den talking. That's the name of the show. So I like the working title. So what are we going to be talking about today, Courtney? What's the topic?
So today we're going to just discuss a little bit about remote working. And it's a topic that has really come to the forefront of many people's minds recently with the outbreak of the coronavirus and all the news around workplaces shifting their workforce digitally. Remote work's been around for a long time. So there's been contractors, there's been companies that have been kind of leading the charge and working remotely for quite a while. I mean, I know Stack Overflow for a fact has been doing this for 10 plus years, roughly that. But I'm sure there's other companies and freelancers for sure that have been doing this much longer. Freelance web developers and engineers.
Right. So tell me more about kind of what do you do? I think that this is kind of we should start with intros because a lot of people probably watching this or listening to this have no idea who we are. Why are we talking about remote?
Yeah. Do you want to go first? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. No. So I'm Dan. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft, and I'm driving some of the Microsoft.com user experiences. So I've been working on technical documentation for now. What is it? Like I started in October 2015, so it's about going on 5 years now in documentation, and about 6 years at Microsoft, out of which 3 years were remote. So I moved to Canada not too long ago, well, 3 years ago, and I've been remote ever since. Same team.
So how was that transition for you?
It's it's jarring, not gonna lie. It was a little bit of a what the heck do I do? Kind of when most of my team is actually in Redmond, and I'm the only one that moved to Vancouver. And it was very jarring because I had to figure out a lot of these remote best practices. I'm reading articles from Jason Fried, David Hennemeyer Hansen, and they're talking about all these remote best practices. And I, at the time, I was reading a lot of those. I was like, oh, this is nice. This is all remote work. But then when I actually started being remote, it's like, oh, maybe I should reread that and actually put it in practice. It was totally new. It was such an adjustment period. It took me probably a year to figure out how to do things the right way. How did it go for you? Because you've been remote for quite some time.
Yeah, so I've been remote. It's been about 7, 8 years now. I
Wow.
started I started at an agency called Universal Mind, and they had many remote contractors, many remote freelancers that they worked with. But I was actually a full-time employee, and the way the organization was structured is they had basically a user experience agency. In my background, in my day job, I'm a product designer, so I work with Den at Microsoft, um, building and designing products, and mainly doing visual UI user experience work. But Universal Mind is kind of where I cut my teeth on remote work. So they had had some experience doing this in the past when I came into the organization. So they were prepared to have a remote worker. The interesting thing was that they actually had their user experience studio was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So there were 15, 16 designers in an office, and I was the only full time that wasn't in the office. So
Wow.
that started to become more and more of a problem the longer I was there. So what happens is you have this tribe there in Grand Rapids, um, and there are conversations that you're left out of. Wasn't a huge deal when it comes to maybe a particular client because you were kind of siloed on a client project. But when it comes to like professional development or networking with fellow designers, that can become an issue.
So how did you build a network? I'm just purely curious since you talked about that, because that's a challenge that a lot of remote workers have. When you're not in the office and most of the people are in the office, how do you do that? Right? What
Yeah,
worked for you?
I guess I will also add that I'm located in Indiana, so I'm in the I'm actually in the middle of nowhere in farm country, Indiana, and there's not a lot of opportunity to connect. The biggest city is Indianapolis, so if I want to, travel to a conference, usually I try to go there or Chicago. Um, but honestly, it's just kind of maintaining a really good, strong virtual presence. That's what I've always put a lot of emphasis on, both in my like networking through Twitter, things like LinkedIn. Um, not really a whole lot of like in-person things, honestly. If I have a chance and I go to a conference, obviously, yes, I'm going to try to make good connections with people. But I think you probably know this. When you go to a conference, there's so many people and there's so much going on. It's hard to build like a deep
Mm.
relationship with anybody.
Right,
You
right.
might get
Yeah.
in a good conversation, and that's it.
Yeah, I think conferences to me, it's a lot of times I see friends that I already know, like yourself, I see my coworkers, but it's rarely where I'm in the kind of mode of, oh, I'm expanding my network to so many new people that will kind of closely work with me through the, short, long term, whatever that might be. Do you ever go to things like meetups? I hear a lot of people talk about, if you have a big city around you, you can always go to a meetup on startups or Python or ML, whatever your interest is. Do you ever go to those?
I used to. So probably 6 or 7 years ago, that was like my main way of, I would get out and I would go to the local design events, and I would try to present, I did make some good connections. So actually, a guy I work for at Microsoft right now, he was a connection from a in-person event that I went to. So I wouldn't say that that was totally like, that's not the way I do things today. I think that people are a lot more socially active on Twitter now, and I definitely use those avenues to participate. So a lot of people hold like meet like hangouts. I can join somebody that's holding like an AMA and they're doing a hangout format like this, right? And I can just join it. So I think that the tech world has definitely moved more towards like having a virtual presence, being able to interact that way, being able to connect and network that way, and it not just being like entirely in-person conference driven.
Right. And I think even the recent events are showing us that a lot of times you'll be forced to have these remote events or remote conferences or remote meetups because it just, I feel like it's even more inclusive because then you get a larger audience that can participate, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody can fly into a city. Not everybody can buy a ticket and go in and pay for the hotel. Versus when it's online, anybody can come in.
It's fascinating to see over the last 3 years things shift this way with the rise of Discord, Slack, and now Teams. So people are able to create communities, digital communities, that are just basically chat rooms, right? They're like our IRC chat rooms. Back in the old days, you would have like an IRC client and you could like chat that way.
Oh gosh,
Um,
that was a long time ago. That
yeah,
was a
like
IRC. I was like 10 years ago when I used an IRC last.
I
It's
don't
still
know.
alive, right? It
I was
still
in I
exists.
was in middle school and early high school, so this would have been like the year 2002. Um,
My gosh, remote connections before remote connections. Talk about that.
so there was actually like a World of Warcraft IRC group that like
Are
that
you
was like where I kind of cut
serious?
my teeth. Um,
Oh my gosh, I totally missed out on that. I always went to MSN groups that were like Harry Potter fan club, and I would sign up for those. But that's not even close to instant response. It's more like a forum, which I think
yeah,
in this case, kind of that's the predecessor of the offline conversation, kind of asynchronous communication. Forums actually, if you think about it, forums are excellent for remote work because you post a message and then you wait for a response. That's kind of what Stack Overflow does with answers, right?
yeah.
You're not
Or
randomizing people. It's
Jeff
nice.
Atwood's product Discourse. Like that's kind of built around his idea there is like building a better forum for the internet. Like it's not necessarily a forum.
Right.
It's made for conversation. So yeah,
Right.
I think that having those tools become more accessible, right? The onboarding experiences are easier. It's easier for people to just download and get going using those products. So we're just seeing this kind of even emerge outside of the scope of tech. I'm seeing it even in my wife's workplace. She teaches at or she works at a K through 12 school, and they are using Teams. And it's kind of changed their workplace because they're not, tied necessarily to just email all the time. It's actually like a gathering place. It's a watering hole, right? It's a digital watering hole. Um, so yeah, back to your original question about networking, I really feel like it's important as a remote to make sure that you are maintaining a great digital presence, and you're curating it, right? You're staying active and you're paying attention to what's going on, and you're actually reaching out to people and you are interacting, maybe giving them feedback on that blog post, or um, retweeting their tweet, or something as simple as like sending them a message that you find interesting from maybe another author, right? Um, just letting them know, hey, like I see you as a person, not just as a like avatar.
Right, right. No, I definitely second the part about Twitter. I love Twitter. I'm probably on Twitter more than I should be, but it definitely allowed me to connect to more people than I have ever connected to before. I think I would credit actually having my job through the power of Twitter, because I blogged something and somebody at Twitter, no, not at Twitter, on Twitter, working at Microsoft, saw what I blogged and said, "Hey, like, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it." It opens doors, and it's one of those things where I went to a college in the Midwest that was not a big name school. We never had, big recruiting events or anything of that nature. I would have missed out on a lot of that if it wouldn't be for Twitter. So that kind of virtual networking and building that network beyond just the constraints of your office, I find it super valuable. So 100% with you. Speaking of which, and we talked about things, forums and IRC, which is a nice digression from the topic of networking. How do you work remote? We talk about asynchronous communication being one of them, which is forums are great for. What's your approach? Like, what do you do day by day? Like, how do you structure everything you do remotely?
Man, I've really taken advantage over the years of like it really does come down to async. Like that is the biggest theme on my head that I can't get out of my head. It's like I try to push people to use asynchronous forms of communication, so that one, it's more beneficial for me, so I can structure my day in a way that makes sense for both my family and my coworkers. As you know, right now I'm working for Microsoft. I'm in Indiana, so I have a 3-hour time delay. When I was working at Stack Overflow, we had people in Poland and that I would occasionally work with. So there was like a 6-hour time gap there. Um, you have to push your work. You have to become better at writing and articulating your ideas in writing, making sure you're keeping tabs on where people are active. So certain people have certain habits. Certain people want to use certain tools to communicate. Every organization is a little different. Microsoft is very DevOps heavy. Stack Overflow, where I worked before, was very Trello heavy. So you have to be familiar with going between tools, using a mixture of tools too. Maybe it's a combination of like Word docs, right, and DevOps.
I
Um,
love Word comments. Just the fact that I can comment on stuff inside a Word document is so convenient.
yeah, it's
Instead of
wonderful.
having a million emails, right? Like, how many conversations just get lost when you start emailing people back and forth, and they fork, and now you have 17 email threads going about the same thing, and then you have to somehow put it all together, versus just leave a comment in the Word doc and you have this
Yeah,
conversational structure. It's so much easier.
yeah, and then you can organize those Word docs, right? Not that you can't organize emails, but um, yeah, I found that it was honestly overwhelming coming to Microsoft because it's such a email-driven org, and things are done so much through email. I'm happy to see, obviously, people adopting Teams as a venue to communicate. So like two-way communication before decisions are made. But once a
Right.
decision is made, it should be logged somewhere, right? You shouldn't have to be searching through a chat log or email thread.
Well, and people, I mean, people leave companies, people come to companies. If, I come in and pick up a certain area that I have not been working on before, I don't have access to anybody's emails or chat logs. I need
Mhm.
to, but I want to read somewhere why certain decisions were made. And this is where things like documents or anything like a markdown file somewhere is super helpful, because it gives me context and not having to go and ask my manager, hey, can you forward me all the emails that you were ever on this specific topic? Like, who has time for that?
Yeah. Well, and another theme that I picked up from my time at Stack Overflow was the idea of like default public. And
Yeah.
as a designer, like our work is obviously exposed to criticism, and you're putting yourself out there when you're designing something. You're trying to design a solution to a problem, and a lot of people are going to have opinions about that problem and the solution. So I found that it was actually an exercise in like breaking down the barrier and like breaking down my own, checking my own biases and putting my work out there early, communicating it early to a broad group of people, like my working group. But anybody can go look at it. Helps, one, make the design better, and two, final reviews aren't as scary, right? And they're not as like potentially off base. Like we can be correctly tracking on the project in the design direction before it ever gets off course.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you
public.
said, yeah, like a lot of people will have input, because I don't know of any single feature or project that I've ever worked on where I was the only one making all the calls. There's always going to be 2, 3, 4, 7 people. Our good friend and our collaborator Isaac Hepworth from also Microsoft, from DevRel, he wrote a doc of working with Isaac, and one of the points that he's making is exactly what you call out. Write things down, having things in public and available to anybody if there's no underlying reason for that doc not to be, because not everything can be public, right? Like if somebody makes people decisions or performance reviews, you probably don't want those exposed to your team, because those are private. But things like feature specifications or designs, there's no reason to put them behind a gate within your company or within your org, short of them being super secret and relating to some secret release.
Yeah. I mean, many times we're working through like a new product area or a feature idea, and the people closest to it, they're going to communicate very intimately. But that doesn't mean those conversations have to happen like in a one-on-one or like a small group message, right? It can happen in a public channel or whatever, so that other people can just kind of keep a pulse on it and like see what decisions are being made, and maybe they have really valuable insight. There's been many times that people have come into a project that I'm working on and they're not directly associated with it, but they had really valuable input and they actually impacted the final design in a great way. So I think that is also like another kind of maybe my third pillar, which is like serendipity, right? So you're default public, but then you're also creating opportunities for serendipity, both within your team and for your product, your design solutions, your ideas.
Right. And this is where kind of that openness, I really like seeing what other people are doing, because oftentimes even you see what they're doing and you're like, oh, wait a second, this will impact my feature or my product direction. Let's talk, let's chat about this, versus finding that out, a month later, once they ship and you realize, oh my gosh, this totally breaks my business model. Or I'm all for openness.
I almost imagine it like if like I like to tell people, like when you go into an office and you see like you go into maybe a private meeting room and you see like a whiteboard filled with sketches,
right?
Like, there was a really vibrant conversation here. It probably was over an hour long, but you have no idea what was talked about. All you have as a kind of artifact is this whiteboard with sketches.
Right.
On it. Like a public chat with designs thrown in it or like wireframes and stuff. It's all there for everybody to see. So like, it's like being able to understand what happened in that meeting room without it having to be in a meeting room in that meeting, right? And
right.
Anytime.
For sure. No, and this kind of brings to the next point that I've experienced, and this is where you should have less meetings and just more writing things down. Because I think in addition to some cultures being very email oriented, there's a lot of cultures that are also very meeting oriented. And what you're describing as, somebody met, they put a lot of stuff on the whiteboard, but then nobody has the context on those decisions. You have the notes, versus when you have a document or you have an open conversation somewhere, like, on a private Stack Exchange instance or something like that, you can always go through and see what people thought, what people said, and you just have more time to flesh out your thoughts, right? When you write things down and you have to outline why I'm doing this, how I'm doing this, what I'm considering, somebody leaves a comment and says, hey, maybe you should reconsider this or do things differently or redesign this. That gives you that natural flow, versus, if I open a OneNote right now and look at the notes of a meeting that I had, 6-7 months ago, I don't remember who said what or why they said that. I just see the note that said, oh, we decided to make the button green. But what's the context to that?
Yeah.
I feel like just writing more things down instead of just doing meetings, which not to say the meetings are not valuable, but I try to do less meetings and just more writing things down.
And, having more asynchronous artifacts in conversation invites people of different personality types, right? Because there are certainly people who are they really are, they can put on a performance for a meeting, or they can
That's a
really
good
take
one.
over or dominate a meeting when in fact somebody else might really need some deep thought around an idea, right?
Right,
They can't take it
right.
all in, and the way that they work, that they don't want to take it all in right in that meeting. They just want to absorb and then maybe come back to you the next day or 2 days like, here's my really deep thoughts on this issue. Sometimes I really value that over just like the immediate gut decision. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm really happy you thought this out and came back to me on this subject with thoughtful comments and not just what you had
right.
time for in that 30-minute window I gave you, right? For the
Oh,
meeting.
I totally love that comment. I think you're spot on with this because you always have meetings, and I'm sure you've been in those meetings. I've been in those meetings where you have one strong voice of somebody that just kind of like, oh, I'll be talking about everything. I have an opinion on everything. And I know I have a fault of mine that sometimes I feel like, nobody's talking in the meeting. I'll talk. And what that results in is that a lot of people will essentially just kind of not respond, or they will not comment on things, and giving them that time buffer and saying, it doesn't matter if you didn't say anything through the meeting, just comment on the doc or send us your thoughts, in a week. That's great. That's fantastic. Nothing needs to be decided that very moment.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an artifact too of like when you go remote, one of the things that really is an issue is you don't have body language. Body language and like your presence in the room, standing creates energy. So, you'll notice that if you have like a group of people in the room, you're giving a presentation. If you have everybody stand and get them active, you'll notice like how much more attentive they are. And I think that that's like maybe something that is also kind of, you have to be mindful of it when you're a remote worker. I love that I have a standing desk, right? Because if I know I'm going to get into a meeting I need to be really active in, I'll stand up. I don't know what it is, but you lose a bit of the social cues, the body languaging that, hey, I have something to say next. And you can't get that through, like, if there's 10 people in this chat right now, we wouldn't know if the ninth person's waiting to have a comment, right? Unless they told us in
Right.
the chat. So
What do you think of, and this is a topic that I know can be a little controversial between people, what do you think of turning the webcam on? Because I realize, to me, I'm personally very comfortable with having the webcam on whenever. Like, I don't, I don't have anything to necessarily hide or anything of that nature. But I do realize that some people might be more introverted. Some people have, health issues they're dealing with, so they can't turn on the webcam. How do you feel about that? Like, just having the webcam on for remote meetings?
I've always viewed it as a nice to have, right? Like, if you're going to be working with these people for years on end, try to have like the video allows us to have a much more natural conversation, right? Than say not just staring at an avatar.
Right.
Now that being said, there are days that I turn my video off because like I have my kids running around in the background. I didn't dress all the way. Like, I'm not gonna get on the video chat, or I don't feel like I need to add the
Right.
visuals. There's sometimes I'll join a giant meeting and I'm just like, I'm going to turn off my video because there's so many people here. I find that
Right.
my habit is to definitely have that video on if it's like, a smaller group meeting or I'm leading it, right? I don't know. I just, it's just a good habit. I think it's part of like curating that digital presence, right? Uh, the best form, you can get is video. So
Right. And I mean, I've heard that from people too when I would meet them in person when I come to campus, and they'd be like, "Oh, you look totally different from your avatar." It's like, yeah, because my photo was taken, I don't know, 6 years ago, and this is, of course I look different. I would hope I look different.
people always like, you're way taller than I thought you were.
Right. Exactly. It's like, oh, or there's all sorts of comments, but this is where I think having things on video just makes it so much easier, because then, hey, you see me act, you see who I am. I'm a person. I'm not just some avatar. And I've seen avatar where people put, SpongeBob as their avatar. It's like, I feel like I'm talking to somebody, like, I don't know who this person is, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's SpongeBob.
That's one
But
thing that, like I said, if you're working, if these people are your coworkers, try to make an effort to be at least like a human being. Like, don't be like some anime character. Or, not that I love anime, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
it's
Yeah, like
work.
I want to
Try
see
to
a
be a human.
face, right? No, for sure. I feel like sometimes it's just confusing because I don't know if I'm talking to the right person because I see like an animated character, and then I was like, oh, wait a second. Oh yeah, now I know who this is. So
Yeah.
it takes me a second. So talking about all these things, I think the another thing that I do want to call out is some of the kind of, or I don't want to say mistakes, but maybe some things that some people don't understand about remote workers. Let's chat about that because I feel like there's a little bit of that chasm between remote and non-remote workers that oftentimes people don't fully internalize what's it like to be remote. So kind of what are some misconceptions or misunderstandings of a remote work? To me, the
I
number
think,
one that stands out is like the time or the fact that it's like, oh, if you're remote, you're watching Netflix all day, you're playing video games,
yeah.
and you're because work from home, right? It's like, and what's at home? At home is your Xbox and your PlayStation, and everything is there. And it's definitely not that. I feel like it goes into the opposite spectrum where people start working more because you have no clear kind of that boundary between I'm in the office, I'm at home, versus you're kind of always in the office.
Yeah, if you ask my wife, I am always in my office. She's like, you need to get out of the office. And I think it's very important that your leadership communicates that, like, you need to end your day at some point and you're not always readily available. Um, I think another thing too is coming from a place like Stack Overflow, that's where I previously worked. They were remote first. So everything that they would do in the office, every piece of equipment, every type of benefit that those workers would get, remotes get too. So remotes are not second class citizens. They're treated like everybody else. They get the same availability for equipment, right? Like a standing desk, a nice chair, same like equipment requisition if they want it. Um, but also factoring in things like, hey, like if we're having a meeting, you have to set up the meeting in a way that it's accessible for remote. So having a video chat, right, attached to the meeting invite, making sure that if you guys are doing a summer party, the remotes also have the opportunity to go do their own thing, right? So they get $50 and they can go out, and take a day off or half day off and go have their own summer party. So I think that's like a leadership thing, right? Like, don't treat your remote workers as second class citizens, um, and make sure they have all the same types of opportunities that like a full time employee would have, like in the office.
Yeah, the meeting comment resonates with me because there's more than once where I would join a meeting and I'd be the only one on the call, and then 20 minutes later, we're like, "Oh wait, you're the only one that was remote. We forgot to call in," and they've talked about a bunch of stuff ahead of time, and it's not the most pleasant feeling,
Hmm.
honestly. But you see that shift kind of where more people start working remote and more people are distributed. Where I know you are remote, I am remote. A lot of the design team oftentimes works remotely. A lot of the PM team works remotely, and then you see that transition of now everybody gets in this remote mode of work because you're kind of forced to, and
Yeah.
your team is distributed. Your core partners are not in one place, and that kind of puts people more to be more aware, I guess is the way to put
Hmm.
it.
Yep.
But yeah, that totally makes sense. Other things I think that people mistake, remote workers is the fact that, oh, if you're remote, that means that you're always going to have things that distract you around you, which is not always the case. There's people that can work remote from a co-working space. There's people that work remote from a isolated room or a soundproof room or whatever that is. Remote doesn't equal that you're always disturbed by people. You're sitting in a cafe sipping your latte or anything like that. um that I feel like that's very common when I talk to people. It's like, oh, so you probably have all these things around you. Like, no, I can still focus pretty well. I have my focus space, I have my way to get into the zone. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
it's
I think
actually, to me, it's easier because I don't have distractions from kind of people stopping by my desk and saying, "Hey, like, can I bug you for a minute?" It's like,
yeah.
now I'll answer in my own time.
I know there are certain personalities that like I don't do well in an office environment because I just want to hang out and talk to everybody. So honestly, for me, the isolation almost helps. I'm very social, so again, I can really do focused deep work for like a large chunk of time, right? Like I'm talking 2 to 3 hours of just work, which is wonderful, right? You can get a lot done in that amount of time. Um, I think another thing that remote employees though have to be mindful of is that you need to also make some concessions and be ready to, like, maybe it's not the best or most opportune time. Like I've had many calls, they're West Coast time. I'm on East Coast. I have to take the call. Like it's going to be later in my evening. I just make a room for that, right? I do that chore, or I try to take care of whatever it is I was going to do at that time of day early in the day. So kind of shifting around your schedule, but making some room to take like important calls and be willing, I guess, to adjust your schedule a little bit too.
Right. Well,
Be
and I think this
flexible.
is
Show some flexibility, like give and take with your coworkers.
right, where, there's cases where, for example, we work with a team in China and our 5 p.m. is their start of day. So there's going to be some compromises where you need to meet at 6 p.m., you need to meet at 7 p.m. But that's also not, I want to look at this as this is not the rule. This is more of an exception.
Mhm.
Because this is where your idea of kind of asynchronous communication and writing things down, this is where it plays in very nicely. When you have those kind of time zone discrepancies and you realize that some people need to take their kids out of school, some people need to take care of, going to the doctor's office or anything of that nature, where if you write things down, a lot of these problems, I don't want to say go away, but they're mitigated. They're mitigated
Yeah.
much better than just having to meet. And I realize that sometimes you have to meet face to face. I love face to face communication with people, but it's easier when you have structure around it.
On that note, I think it is very wise, once again, kind of speaking to if you're looking at scaling up your remote workforce and you're trying to plot, like, well, how is this going to work out? Absolutely critical to get everybody in the same room, once or twice a year. I
Right.
can't tell you how important and how like beneficial the Stack Overflow like meetups were, just as a venue to like get to know your coworkers. It wasn't it was never very productive to try and get work done during these. Like they were genuinely like, let's get all these people that are really smart together and let's see what kind of happens. Let's see what type of relationships they build. And that is a really strong catalyst for like motivating your team, getting them
Right.
excited about like kind of rallying around something like, hey, we have our meetup. This is going to be awesome this year. And yeah, just like the team spirit and camaraderie and like getting to know who you're working with, because it can get lonely, and
Right.
it's really nice to be able to like spend time with your coworkers.
And you just have the opportunity to learn more about different sides of them, right? Because like
Mhm.
for me, you didn't know that I play certain video games before we met in person because this is like it just doesn't come up in a call to discuss some design reviews, right? We
Yeah.
don't talk about it like, oh, have you played the new Diablo? I don't know. Like this
Or
is
that
just
you snowboarded, right? I didn't know that as well.
yeah, exactly. Or the fact that you're working with kids in like various schools, and you're coaching track, right? Like this is a
Yeah.
huge part of your life, and like these are the things that you would just not get to know about people short of talking to them in this informal setting.
Yeah, and there's no way, like I'm a college track and field coach. There's no way that I would be able to do that and work at Microsoft probably. Like there's the opportunities would never align. I would never be able to be a coach at Wabash College and work at Microsoft.
Right.
Or have the time to local like co-location. They're not even in the same state, right? So it just creates a again, it's like a tag along like benefit. It's like all these little moments are able to be created just by the fact that I'm remote.
So
Uh,
how do we convince more? You talk about kind of the benefits. A lot of companies are still hesitant to remote, right? Like we talk about bigger corporations that when you talk remote or not in the office, that's a scary world for a lot of people.
mhm.
Because now you don't have people in the office. Now you don't have the opportunity to go directly to their desk or their cubicle. Uh, I feel like there's a number of things that remote still opens up opportunities towards that compensates for the fact that people are not in the office. So we talked about, before this meeting where there's definitely a positive effect on the environment, right? Like you're just If you're commuting less, you're less
Carbon
exhaust.
footprint is smaller.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have companies that do care about the, things like climate change and things like the effect on the environment, there you go. Just having a remote workforce minimizes that significantly.
Think about your taxes. My taxes go to the town that I grew up in that would otherwise not have had me. So it
Right.
reduces the idea of what they call like, brain drain. Like
Right.
these smart, intelligent people. I'm not saying I'm smart and intelligent. What I'm saying is
We all are.
people
Let's be realistic. We
people
all
don't
are.
leave the community, right? The people that you
Right.
need to stay and like kind of keep a community going don't leave. So a lot of our, smaller communities are aging. This generation's aging because their children and the people who really should be taking over the reins are moving to big cities and growing those urban centers. So I think that is really exciting that remote work can enable people to stay maybe where their birth family is, where they're traditionally they've been around, right? Like my wife has her parents have been farming this area for a long time. Like we're going to take over that farm someday. Once again, not possible if I lived in Washington. So yeah, I think that there's like obviously too, there's the tax based thing. There's the fact that a home in Indiana is only $150,000, right?
Right. Right.
With
Right.
3 acres
Cost
of
of living
land
is
and
way different.
2,500
Yeah.
square feet, like that's a benefit to me, right? And
Yeah.
probably my children. Um, so yeah, I think back to your original question, it's like how do you start convincing these companies or how do companies start moving this way? But like it's really hard when you're on like a hourly billing cycle.
Yeah.
Like you're tracking little tiny hours. It's like, yes, you can do remote that way. And I did do it that way when I was at Universal Mind, billing to a client. But the clients understood, hey, these workers are distributed. They're going to be available at different time zones. And so you just have to set that expectation. Can you trust your workers? That's the second thing. Is it a trust issue? Like, do you feel like the people that you have employed are one, necessary, and two, like, are they getting the job done? Are you
Yeah.
setting clear expectations for what needs to be done? I think anybody who's given a remote position has a ton of responsibility um, to get their shit done. Like,
Yeah.
get your stuff done, but it's actually a motivator because if you get your stuff done, you have more time for the things you love to do.
I think
So,
that's the difference. That's the big difference between tracking time spent on a problem versus tracking impact, right?
yeah,
Because like you can spend 2 hours on a problem and have tremendous impact versus somebody that spends 8 hours in an office and doesn't have nearly that. And I'm not saying that somebody that works in an office has less impact. It's not absolutely not the case, but just valuing the impact by time spent seems to be a little off, right?
hmm
Because at the end of the day, it's like if I get things done, does it matter where I am getting those things done? Probably not.
no,
And I mean, and also the thing that, talent is everywhere. It's not just those hubs. And you have sometimes talent that just cannot move for some reason. Somebody's taking care of their parents. Somebody is, their kids are in school and pulling them out of school is going to be add a lot of complication to their life. They can't move. They can't relocate. Do you just miss out and pass on that talent and just say like, sorry, we cannot hire you?
yeah.
Right. And
It's like,
I
oh,
mean,
we are an innovative and cutting edge company, but we only hire like within 30-mile radius of our city. It's like,
right.
what? Like,
Right, exactly. And the thing about it too is with the modern technology, I mean, we have Teams, we have Zoom, we have Slack, Hangouts, you name it. There's tools to make the connection easy. I realize that also probably the challenge of broadband internet and kind of the broadband penetration is not quite equal yet in North America or even, Eastern Europe, for example, where I'm coming from. A lot of the population doesn't have access to internet if you're like in some village somewhere, but it's getting there and kind of the barriers of entry are getting slowly removed and you have more of the opportunity, better internet, you have the
mhm.
tools, that are inexpensive, there are tools that are free. Use Skype, I don't care, that open these doors, so we no longer have the excuse of saying, oh, it's hard to do remote because we can't connect people. You can connect to them anywhere.
I will ask you this question. I know you've only been remote for like about 3 years, but do you think there's any difference in terms of like years of experience? So I think there's certainly when my internship perspective or experience taught me a lot, and it was an in-person internship. It was basically an apprenticeship
Right.
where I learned everything that I learned. I know about programming from there. It got me my start in my career. I think I probably would have had a really hard time doing that remotely, honestly. Uh,
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
so
no.
my question for you is like, do you think that it's more of a challenge for companies that are having younger talent or junior people, right? Um,
You know, it's a good question. I thought about that, and I think this is where I will say that remote is a valuable tool, but with that little asterisk on it that says it depends. Where things like internships, just like you, I did my internship in person, and I found it tremendously valuable to build those relationships with people, especially when I didn't know what I'm doing or how I'm doing things. I
mhm.
needed somebody to almost, I don't want to say handhold, but to show me the ropes and just explain how things work, go in a meeting with a VP and present my stuff and see the feedback, see how they react, how they think. That was tremendously valuable. So I would say for definitely for junior employees, for people in college, having that in-person internship would probably be way better than remote. I would say if you have the chance to do that, that would be so much more valuable.
Hmm.
That said, I still think that if somebody doesn't have the opportunity to do that, in person. So, for example, say somebody is trying to get an internship from some other country, like in Eastern Europe, where I mentioned where I'm coming from. It's very complicated because you have to worry about things like visas. You have to worry about things like, the cost of the ticket. And oftentimes, some internships don't pay for relocation. Some internships don't pay for housing or anything of that nature. It has a lot of complications. And when your internship is in person only, that is also excluding a lot of talent essentially, versus when you're remote, you can say that, by having regular meetings with the individual, by having regular kind of sync ups to understand what is blocking them, if they have any questions, and see how that works. I don't think it's impossible to do remote. I do think it's easier and much more efficient in person. It will give you much more experience. So I would prefer that.
Yeah,
But
I would echo that kind of last train of thought because in my experience with younger designers, it has been quite a bit more hand-holding remotely. So I have to create more documents. I have to create more stand-ups, right?
yeah,
There just needs to be more. You have to be a lot more proactive as like the person managing them to make sure that there's clear expectations set. We know when we're going to talk, and kind of just basically making sure they don't feel like they're wandering aimlessly, right? Um,
right, right. No, I mean, and I mentored interns in Redmond while I was here in Canada, and just having that conversation with them about what's blocking you, what are the things that I can help you with, turning on the webcam and just seeing their reaction to the conversation and how they kind of think about certain problems is not impossible. I would say it's definitely, it depends. If somebody would ask me, would I prefer an internship in person? Absolutely. If that was not an option, would I take an internship that's remote? Yeah, 100%. I feel like it still can be valuable and it can still bring in a lot of experience regardless of where you are.
yeah, and I think it definitely makes it more accessible to people who maybe don't have the means.
Right.
Like you gave the example, and maybe somebody just is not, they're not in the area.
Right.
Um,
So
like
let's talk about like the things that you're describing were not in the area. Like, do you think there would be people from Indiana that wouldn't be able to take an internship in person? Because I know there's a lot of people from here that wouldn't be able to do that.
I'm not sure. I think that somebody young and in that position would probably try and put themselves out there and make it work.
Yeah.
But you're asking a lot, right? Like maybe
Right.
they have I don't know, like a fiance that's going through nursing school. I don't know.
Right.
There's so many
Right.
scenarios. Like having the option, like saying, we did this with a recent hire. We said, hey, you can work remote. He was a junior designer. You can work remote, or you can go in the office. We don't really care. We're remote first, remote based, but yeah, we'll give you an office space. And he actually was like, oh, all right, I'm going to move out there and I'll make it work. So for him, that was important to be there in the Microsoft office. But yeah, I would say like, um, I think there's certainly scenarios where people might not, where they would think it's awesome that they can do a remote internship. And I
Yeah.
think there probably needs to be better mentorship and guidance and best practices kind of put in place. I think that we're in kind of the early stages of remote really catching on, and a lot of the remote positions that they feel like they've been very kind of senior or well tenured people, right? And now we're starting to see this younger generation be exposed to working remotely.
Yeah.
Actually, my sister-in-law, her first job out of college was a remote. She was a remote social media
Nice.
advisor for Ascension Health, and this job actually ended up not being what she thought it would be because she wanted to be in the office, right?
Right.
So I think there's definitely those type of people too, that they want the social interaction. I think it's great to have both.
Yeah,
Both
for sure. Yeah, this is not like our talk is not about, everybody should be remote forever and, cancel all the office leases. It depends on what you're doing. And there's a lot of jobs that cannot be done remotely. And especially, for somebody that's working kind of within those offices that is helping with things like, building maintenance. Not every job is remote friendly. So this is not something that we can blanket say, everybody in the world will be remote in 10 years. Like that's just not possible.
like waste management can't be.
Right, exactly.
There's
Like
so many jobs, like welding. You can't be a welder. There's like a lot of like trade jobs that can never be that way. Tech, I kind of, I'm not sure. Maybe like on site like server,
yeah,
um, manager or something. I don't know what that would entail entirely, but
yeah,
I
because
feel like a lot of the tech jobs can move that way.
you're right. I mean, if you're working in a data center and like there's a faulty hard drive that needs to be replaced, like, I mean, we don't have robots to do that, not yet, anyway.
Right.
So and it's you wouldn't be able to do that remote. There's somebody that needs to be there in the data center that's has a quick response where you don't want half of your product to go down because hard drives are failing left and right. And it's like, hey, wait like 3 hours before somebody gets there. Like
Mhm.
somebody needs to be working there. So there are some constraints, and it's totally understandable where not every company might be ready. But speaking of which, we can wrap up our conversation on the future casting, as you described. I love that term, future casting. Where do you think remote work is going to be in the next? I don't know. What time frame do you want to talk about? Like, is it 5 years, 10 years?
I really feel like within 5 years, the major players in like the tech sector are going to be like largely remote first, at the very least remote friendly. So I'm talking Google and Facebook. They're kind of already making strides together.
Right.
Microsoft already is definitely heading that direction. IBM. I think a lot of these companies are going to start to realize, hey, we can get some really good talent, and it's going to be a lot more competitive. Amazon even. I
Right.
know they traditionally aren't like really open to it, but I think they could see them moving that way too. So
That's a
then
good prediction. Yeah, I like
then there's
it.
it's interesting though, because like you would think that they might be leading the charge, and they aren't. Like it's been companies like Stack Overflow, it's been companies like Basecamp, right? These smaller like startups that have proven
Yeah.
that that model can really work.
And
Uh,
Basecamp has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, if you're looking for a company that is the role model for remote work, I mean, that's them. I
yeah,
can't think of any.
they're building tools for it, and they actually hire their workforce. Whereas somebody like Slack, they're building tools for it, but their whole team has to be in San Francisco. Uh,
Right.
that one, like in the thing, same thing with Discord. Discord app, like they're an amazing product, but you have to be in San Francisco to work on
Right.
Discord,
And
which is
and I mean, for people that worry about like, oh, if you're remote, you can build great products. GitHub. I mean, GitHub is built mostly by a remote workforce, and look how many people in the world use GitHub. Right? It's a fantastic product. There's so many jobs within it that it would be, nobody would say that you can only build in an office. Absolutely
yeah.
not. No, I like that. I think I definitely it resonates with me that more companies will go remote, especially with kind of the crises that are happening right now around COVID and any other health issues or like natural disasters. People start
I
realizing,
mean, like we talked, I touched a little bit on housing costs. It's like
right,
every time I've looked to move, like I've been approached by companies or looked to move out there, I'm just blown away. I just can't fathom it. It's
right,
almost like hard for my brain to wrap around like how expensive everything like property is there.
right.
Um, so I think that that's too, like people have to weigh that when you're talking to talent. and they have to weigh, okay, well, you're going to make me move from my nice place here to some place that's really crowded and it's super expensive. That's not my lifestyle. Like, everybody's different. Um,
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like, do you buy a house now or do you buy a house in 10 years? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know. Like, it depends on what your life
Yep.
priorities are, but also where you live does dictate a lot of those decisions. So, yeah, I think it's also in a couple of years, we'll see more teams being more open to the idea that remote workers are just as trustworthy as somebody that's not remote, and just putting that trust in knowing that even though you might not have the meetings in person, even though you might not have the conversations next to somebody's office, you're still going to be productive, you're still going to be able to get things done and add value to the company or the project or a team, whatever you're working on. Because I feel like right now there's still a lot of that hesitation where it's like, oh, I don't know, I don't quite know if I'm ready to hire somebody remote. And I think it'll start like thawing that
Mhm.
ice of no, absolutely not remote, you have to meet in person. It'll get better.
Yeah,
um
it's almost like, a company has to have the champion or the one person that's like in that leadership position that's able to say, "Hey, we're going to start making this a priority.
right.
We're going to try at first to be remote friendly, and then we're going to go remote first." Right? I think that it does kind of happen in phases. Like, if you're an established company, you have
Right,
to
and I
start
mean, look
you
at
have to
our
start
org.
by building habits of it.
Yeah, I mean, look at our org, right? Like the DevRel at Microsoft. Like, look at all the developer advocates. Pretty much all of them are remote.
Hmm.
I don't. Yeah, some of them have offices, but they're working all over the globe, and they're fantastic.
And then, like, our
There's
product team is going more this way too, right? Like,
absolutely,
we're probably like one of the first within the company that's moving that way. So I think that's pretty cool too.
and I can only hope that this will just spread more widely, and we have more and more remote people. Because I mean, remote does open up a lot of opportunities. I love being remote. To me, I was scared of it at first, but the more I work remote, the more I realize, like, hey, actually, I love it. I love
Hmm.
the flexibility. I love not having a commute. I love being able to kind of manage my time as I need to and not constrained to like being a physical location. Like, can you imagine if you have, oh, I need to go and deal, with a car repair. I have to deal with like 3 hours of commute back and forth until I get to the car from the office. But like instead, I can just go from home, get it done, come back, and be right back to work. So it's
Yeah.
actually it's a win for the company because I'm wasting less time and I'm available much quicker than I would have otherwise. So
Not having to deal with a commute, like, you get that time back. You're able to spend it with your family,
right.
or you're able to spend it doing like taking care of yourself, like getting a workout in instead of spending that hour drive to
Right.
wherever you're going. So
Which I think this is kind of, we can wrap up on this very important point. When you work remote, don't forget about the fact that, it's have work life balance. It's very easy to slip. It's very easy, kind of what we started the podcast on, and the fact that you can start in this mode of like, oh, I'll wake up, I'll get to work. And then before you look at the clock and it's 10 p.m. The day has gone. Like, have
mhm.
those boundaries, have those limits of saying, I'm remote, but then I clock out at 5 or at 6, whichever the time is, where after that, you're not doing work. You have to shelve it for the next day.
Shut it off.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there are times that I can, my computer is in here beckoning me, like,
Yeah.
I need to go see what that thread is about. And I think, you caught me the other night, like I was online working for
Yep.
who knows why, like at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't have anything else to do, but that's also, maybe that's a benefit to the employer. Like, they get
Right.
some extra production out of me that they wouldn't have expected. But
But
uh,
the flexibility of hours, where during the day you can take, 1 hour to take your kid to some practice somewhere, but then you'll compensate that 1 hour later.
yeah.
It's not a zero sum game. So
And another thing that I would like to talk about too, and I know we're kind of getting to the end here, but it's like sick days. Like,
yes.
everybody has sick days, and I think it's funny because when I tell people that we have sick days even when we're remote, my father-in-law is like, "You guys have sick?" He's like, "You can just work straight through your sick day," and it's like, well, if you're genuinely sick, you probably should just rest.
Right. Right.
Take advantage of your sick days, even though you are remote. And I've caught myself doing that too, where I've worked through a sickness. It's really not worth it. Like, just take some time off, use your sick day, get better. You know,
Right. Because health, like burnout, mental health, and making sure that your physical health is in good shape, it's up to you to manage it. Don't kind of have your laptop by your bedside where you can, wake up, read email, go to bed with your laptop on you reading email. It's just not good. It doesn't help anybody.
No. Nope. And if you have a significant other, it doesn't make them happy either.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, this is a good conversation. I think this is a nice try for our very first episode of Courtney and Den talking. So we'll see what kind of reaction we get to this. And hopefully we'll get to talk more about remote work, and maybe we'll even have some guests.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I will also have my fancy camera then too. I'll hook that up.
Nice.
So we can talk a little bit more about equipment that time.
Yes, that's a very important topic that I think deserves its own episode, just equipment, because there's just so much out there.
Awesome. There's a lot of awesome stuff out there. There's a lot of people doing some really cool stuff. So
I cry for my wallet already. Well, okay, we can talk about that the next time then. So thanks all for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Later.